humans and non-human beings to live their fullest potential and capacities in the world. So this is the first place that I emanate from as an architect and an educator. Second thing I would say is, I said this again this morning, but I think that when I teach, I was asked maybe both at SIRE, but also particularly at Michigan, to help construct visual culture at the school and to help construct the thesis culture of the school. But most importantly, I think my job is to train people's spatial imaginations. that's my job description. You don't get tenure saying that exactly, but that's what I hope to do. And my interest is not so much in practice or professional training, practice perhaps, but different kinds of practices, but really trying to think about all of you as cultural agents who can change the world. In my worldview, we don't need a lot more buildings that are just things. We need things that are conceptually adept, that offer in a really complex, wild, hybridized, strained world, I would say. We need people who can really see around corners and make something out of nothing. People say magicians and detectives, but conceptually adept to construct engagement with the contemporary world. It's tangled, as you all know, but I'm super optimistic about the world, and so I teach from a position of optimism. One or two other key things. When I work and teach, I don't take things for granted. Even though I have a lot of things that have been granted to me and ordained by education and the profession, I don't naturally accept things. I'm not a skeptic, but I want to work them over to see whether there are other lives in there or whether I want to dissuade certain predilections that I might have otherwise had to shift into other directions. So what I'm going to do then is, I don't know how many images there are. There are probably 350 images, which is a cross section through my work. And I'm going to set up some key thoughts that travel with me, no matter what work I make or where I'm teaching or what I'm teaching about. And then I'll show you several bodies of work in which there are different foci within each piece of, in terms of my ambitions and how I'm trying to grow through the work itself. In addition to, let's see if this works. Paula and Brandy work their magic. Let's see if that works. We'll do it the old-fashioned way. Let's see. Try to do it the old-fashioned way. It was working.
Yeah, so we'll just do this.
See how that goes. Yep. So there are pieces of text which accompany some of the images, and I won't, but we'd be here until tomorrow at this time if I went through everything. So I'll make, should anyone be interested, I'll make the PowerPoints available. But there are key thoughts, some of which I've just touched on. Architecture as a discipline, generosity, cultural agency, and education is an active construction. I think we always need to be questioning, reflecting, transforming architectural education. I think it's honest right now across the board generally. And my larger project probably takes the picture plane, the linear perspective, and tries to augment, frame things that are embedded in the histories and practices of linear perspective. And I'm interested in the things that Paula mentioned in terms of broadening our conceptions about architecture. I'm really interested in how we work on things. So as I move through the slides or images, I will touch on some of those things, is the bell. The bell's a nice accompaniment. When it gets to be rhythmic instead of repetitive, be more interesting. So I'm working on a book of mine. So Matt and I are working on a book to do with our work and to do with our interest in contingent architectures. And I'll touch on that when share a few images with you of work that we've done. This is an outline. Does that top bit, the participant enabled closed captioning? I wonder if there's a way for that to disappear. Because I'm trained visually and optically, anything, like when students open up, a file with stuff around it, they say, can we get rid of that stuff? I'm trying to look at what I want to look at. So if that'd be awesome. Thank you. Anyway, this is a kind of an outline for the book. And there are things that I care about. Some more or less heavily practiced, others I have a sense about, others are deeply embedded in this. So in the book, I'm going to try to touch on this range of things. You can put your eyes on a couple of them to get a sense of it, but moving from the history of ideas, which I talked about this morning a little bit, which has architecture always participates in the history of ideas, always. And sometimes we don't know, but with the making of this room, certainly discussions to do with perspective, to do with geometry, to do with material structure, language systems, and so on. So I'm interested in that sort of larger arc of things, the history of ideas, and then all kinds of things from how we work to structures of schools to how I make choices to references and so on. This is a course outline for where I can imagine the book might go. This has done something interestingly funky with the text. So I'm a list guy. Please come in if you'd like to. So I keep track of a lot of things when I work. So for example, things, conceptual frameworks, people, movements. I want to know where the influences are and where my commitments are over a longer trajectory. So I've got a bunch of images like this, and they're filled with, things like metaphors and different kinds of people, horse saddles, emergence. There are lots of things that have been consequential to me in my development. When I work, if I work properly, which is infrequently these days, I've been at the University of Michigan 17 years, and I've probably worked, if I added up all the hours, a year. I'm just involved with a lot of things. So, when I write things for publication and conferences and stuff. That's not work. Work is designed for me work. So, anyway, this if you only saw one image, this is a kind of an infrastructure for me to remember, to reflect on, think about when I work. And I'll touch on some of these things. Like I'm really interested in the roles of things. I'm interested in what I call the naming problem. I'm interested in latency and tacit knowledge. I'm interested in lots of things when I work, but that's a kind of consolidated, that's a freeze-dried version of things when I work. Touched on these this morning. And part of working and establishing a discipline for working on things has to do with design methods and how we work. And I won't belabor the point here at all, but I would just encourage everyone to think increasingly about how you set up a discipline, an approach and discipline for working, and then how you carry work out. Design methods and representation techniques are the two primary means by which architects do that. So these are super diverse in terms of what they allow me to do and not do, and I touch on some of them in my work, I combine them, reinvent different methods for working and so on as appropriate to the work. Again, a list guy. I'm heavily influenced by Wallace Stevens' poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, which is a beautiful poem in its own right. If you don't know it, 13 stanzas. Essentially, Wallace Stevens builds indirect relationships to a blackbird. He never describes it. It's a glint in a woman's eye. It's a shadow in the pine trees. It's that kind of thinking. So I'm interested in 13s to begin with, as an homage to Wallace Stevens, but more importantly, I'm interested in building a world around things that imply or point to certain possibilities, but seldom make them explicit. That has to do with my interest in ambiguity, multiplicities, emergence, contingency, which have to do with audience investment, co-constructing worlds, and so on. So blah, 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 blah. Some drawing and visualization thoughts. There are certain patterns in my work. There are shape grammars, ways in which I use language, the approach. There are certain visual things that occur visually in my work. So I also keep track of those mostly so I can get out of my own way. My interest as a designer is to be able to design things that are situationally specific, that are different from what I did yesterday. So I'm not interested in what I did yesterday being the same as what I do next week and next year. I have zero interest in that because situations are always different. And you'll see I work in different kinds of situations, sometimes real sites, sometimes abstract constructions, sometimes not sites at all. So I need an ability to be versatile and dexterous. Design methods are helpful. And so to keep track of what I always do, these are default things, so I want to make sure that I'm not always going back to the watering hole because I'm doing something that's quite different in the next piece of work. When I work, that's our daughter, who just started at Williams College in Massachusetts. So she's always sort of going to be an angel. But when I work on my work table, I prepare the workspace, clean things up, I clean all my gear up, I get things out, I take things properly, I get things around me that are going to be useful, so I'm ready to do the work. I also do a little bit of work in Photoshop. I'm a total novice, but I'll show you a few things that demonstrate that funkiness. I'm incredibly interested in all kinds of digital ways of working. So students I work with, they're working in scripting, coding, processing, they're working on advanced modeling, AR, VR. They're working on a huge range of things which are linked to digital culture. I know very little in terms of operations, which is the way I use them. I understand them conceptually, so I can work with students. And then there's another kind of a workspace, which are things like Instagram or Facebook, or ways in which I've been encouraged. I had no interest in Facebook or Instagram. Our daughter said, "Ellison, do you want to do that, Dado?" And a former colleague from SciArc said, "Can you please?" I haven't seen it again for a long time. She said, "Can you please post some of your work?" I said, "Okay, I'll try to do that." So anyway, I've been extremely lucky to, I've probably been to about 85 schools of architecture, and I've been extremely fortunate to teach at several of them. And I've been fortunate to be asked to publish student work. So my good friend Jonathan Hill, who's a tutor of Unit 12 at the department, happens to be, I think, the best design school in the world. Anyway, Jonathan produced a book called The Architect as Physical Historian, and he asked me to contribute a chapter amongst many others. And so, yeah, and to foreground student work. So I wrote about student work. It's a chapter in the book, and these are some of the images of the student work, just recent student work in that particular publication. And then he asked me, I don't know why he asked me to include some of my work to vandalize the work of the students. And then I'm part of a group called Drawing Architecture, and there are 15 of us from around the world that we're drawers. They include the likes of Peter Cook and Mike Webb of Archigram, and Will Spiller, who happens to be the editor of the AD, Atchard, my good friend, and others. Anyway, Neil edited a book called Emerging Talents, and he basically tapped me on the shoulder and 12 other educators in the world and said, "Please share your student work." So some of the student work. So I took a handful of pieces of work and set that up in the essay. This is out, I don't know if it's 2 years old yet. Emerging Talents. AD is an unfortunate half a dozen or 8 publications. So this is student work, emerging talent. So these are talented students from around the globe that 13 of us, let's say, foregrounded. And then we have at Michigan, we was on a small committee that developed a project called Gradient. And it's basically to produce dialogues within and outside of the college. And one of the things that I was asked to do was to produce one of the pamphlets as related to thesis group that I work with. So this is also writing about that, and you see some other similar images here. But what I'm happy to, I've been lucky to work with some extremely interesting students, committed students, and I'm incredibly happy to be able to share that work through social media, through forms of publication, and so on. So these are a few forms of publication where work has been shared that students that I've been very, very grateful to work with have produced. So now, quick right turn, and then we'll go sort of Instagram feed speed. I'm going to show you some things that I've worked on. So when I started teaching outside, I taught my first year of the graduate program, and we would take students out to the desert, basically the American Southwest, for a week. We did instructions and measure and photography things and so on. And I realized that I knew nothing about the landscape, and I'm out there with them trying to discuss landscape things. So I decided to make what I call one-a-days. They're landscape drawings. And what I would do is I get up early, I would shower, I would eat, and then I would make a drawing. And the idea was to make a drawing a day. And at that time, I was living in Philadelphia and teaching at Penn. I was teaching at Amy was doing a PhD at Virginia. So I was moving around a lot. So these were light and I could get them to happen. Anyway, I made, for the first 6 weeks, I made one a day. And then I was just moving around too much. I was working on other things. And so I made 750 of them. And I haven't made any since 2005 when our daughter was born. It's nothing to do with Ella. It's to do with other things that I'm trying to do. Anyway, a couple of things. I would really recommend doing one thing a day for a while. Fold paper, interestingly, make an interesting mark, find an object and translate that into a building, whatever those things are. You will develop expertises and knowledge sets that you otherwise there's no way to get at. Anyway, serial production I think is super, super helpful. I set up a format. These are 24 inches wide and they're 18 inches high. They're on 2 layers of white trace from a particular store in Philadelphia. They're taped identically, they're labeled identically, and there's a 9-inch, 12-inch image. So I needed to set some parameters, and then I would get the paper out, get squared away on my work table, and say, this one I had some cadmium red, a vessel of that, on my work table. And I said, I wonder if I could make landscapes that way. So I make them in series. The smallest series is 4, the largest is 35. There's a series to do with states. 15 of the states didn't get done, so apologies to those states, but I make them just different kinds of interest. My dad died 25 years ago, but we used to backpack in the winter and summer a lot in the Sierra Nevada. And aspen trees were always something that grounded us, so I made a series as an homage to my father. I was thinking about emergent landscapes, so these are made. The upper left, there are a series of them that are made by putting a series of marks in play. They're asphalted and golded with gold leaf. And then I use Bastine and alcohol and other things. And I basically then rub graphite over them. You don't see them. You don't see them. And then all the gray stuff just starts to work to the surface. So they're uncontrolled. One of the reasons I started doing those is a lot of them I was controlling them, like taping, very particular geometries, and I said I need things outside my control. So I made a bunch of the, with that as a kind of an impetus. You know, I was thinking about red ponds, thinking about Pompeii, fungal landscapes, monochromatic landscapes, and so on. One-a-days, super fun. I don't make judgments about them. I don't throw them away. I'm going to try to get back to them. I have 2 series that I would like to do. And we'll see. Got lots of other things. I'm also interested in working at very different speeds. So I made 50 projects. These are projects that are just word days. So they're projects that are done very, very quickly. architecture of multiple psychologies, X-ray architecture, architecture of folds, creases, wefts, puckers, and drifts. To keep my imagination alive, to work quickly, to imagine things, build the plan here and the section over there, and so on. So they help my imagination, they help my conceptual breadth, and I can work quickly through projects. I'd like to work on, I have 50 of these. I'd like to work on 6 or 8, really work on them because I think they have some juice. Anyway, they're also gathered up in terms of what I think about as contemporary topics, architectural drawing, conceptual things, duration, multiple temporalities, change atmospheres of fabrication, materiality, and production. So they're linked to what I think are some of the important stakes, at least when I made these some years ago. Now another quick jump. So I was teaching at Penn and working with Denise and Bob in Philadelphia, and I moved to Los Angeles. The only way to leave the office, I was very, very grateful. Bob took me on like a son. I lived with them for the first 2 months in Philadelphia because I was destitute and they were kind people. Anyway, the only way to leave the office when you work with Bob and with some of Denise collaboratively with them, the only way to leave the office is to move far away. Otherwise, Bob is always, sadly, Bob died a few years ago, but as a very, very, very close friend and mentor for sure. Anyway, I moved out to Los Angeles and I was going to be an architect. I had a small guest house project in Montecito, California. I had been invited to, there were 30 architects, I think, from around the world invited to a competition for a house based on a 15th century text. The Czechoslovakia. So I had that, and then I had, so I did 5 weeks we had to do it, and I did 5 proposals, and then finally built that bastard model. In the last 10 days, I cooked up this proposal. And then I had a house with another client in Borrego Springs, which is in one of Southern California's desert. And when I turned up there, I thought, good, I am good to go. This is good. This is why I came here. So I made this. I always like to say I worked about 6 hours on this, and I made $800. You don't do that. You don't do that. Anyway, I'll go back. This is something I also like to mention. These are 24 by 36 inch sheets of vinyl. I constructed this plan 32 times before I got the plan that I wanted, working on other parts of the house as well. So that was okay. I needed to do that because I wasn't very skilled. After a while, I thought, well, all of those plans had value to me when I made them. What if you could build all 32 plans simultaneously? So that's the next project, to build all 32 plans for that house as one house. You build the plans, you have to work out everything else as well. Anyway, I made a lot of drawings, sectional drawings, and elevations and models and so on. And these are technical drawings of what the house is meant to be like. And then made some atmospheric drawings. And at the same time, the year after, Amy had started at Cambridge, and we lived in a very, very narrow house in Cambridge, about that wide, about 40 feet long. And I decided to make a room, to design a room. And so the room, there's a floor below in the basement. It's linked to religious iconography and blue collar things. It's just compressing distances into a place that don't belong there and so on. So just descriptively, there's a leather floor. There's a double aquarium. There's a cactus wall with fire in it. There are 2 cast pieces. This is a hot air balloon that moves in the space, the double aquarium. There are inscribed languages of different. The double aquarium is in all of St. Paul's Cathedral in Rome. It's in the large aquarium. The aquarium is here, and so on. As a result of making those, I realized 3 things. I wasn't very skilled. They were all the same, and I couldn't imagine 50 or 60 years trading on that skill set. I'm in trouble. I came out here to do something, and I don't think I'm skilled enough to do that. not smart enough, I'm not certain enough. At the same time, Robert McGurry, who sadly died about 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago, was the director of the graduate program at SCIARC, and he asked me if I'd like to have lunch. And at the end of lunch, he asked me if I wanted to teach at SCIARC. I said, hey, I'll do that. And so 3 weeks later, I was teaching at SCIARC and so on. As a result of making that graphite drawings, I then made a second version of that house. These are called aspectival drawings. They're really critical fragments. So they're not perspectival or plan or elevation, but they're the things that matter. And at that moment, the architectural drawing began to open up for me. The critical work that I made, the most important drawing that I've ever made is in 1996. This is the year my father died. And I was going to enter what was called the David's Island competition. It's off the coast of New York. There's an island, and basically it was an ideas competition. So I used the drawing as a way to do 3 things. Because in conventional drawings, I couldn't figure out a way to deal with things that I couldn't see in a plan or a section. Like mythical sea travelers and the way they might make an appearance here. I didn't want to draw a plan of that. So I invented, I invented a kind of drawing type in which I could keep multiple languages of representation alive simultaneously. So their language, these are 1 letter at a time, press type. Yeah. So there's language, there are figurative pieces, there are diagrammatic pieces, there are notational parts in there. So it allowed me to ideate about things that I hadn't been able to formally, because I could keep them in place somehow, so I could figure out whether they were useful. The second thing was I used the drawing. I had a bunch of heavy content, things to do with military surveillance and panoptic and panoramic vision, nautical cartography, things I want to care for about 15 things like that. But I used the drawing then to fabricate programmatic logics that allowed me to tickle those kinds of interests. So there are things like landings for mythical sea travelers with scientific polyp labs that harvest kelp. There are drifting and migrating landscapes. There are camouflagic surfaces. There's this is a surveillance field which is linked. There are 15 machines which are linked to 15 different ocean conditions, linked to Rio Moji, the Great Zen Garden, and Kyoto that has 15 rock outcroppings. A silver shell surface, an axis of mutiny, multiplied officers' headquarters, blah, 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 blah. So it allowed me to invent programmatic thinking and not bathrooms and pavilions that would look at this island, but that were invigorated by the things I thought were useful to work on. And the third thing I was thinking about was the drawing as an object, as a construction, as in its own right, that it has validity. So it's the longest drawing that it's 24 inches by 36 inches. It's made of about 6 layers, and it took the technical part of it took about 125 hours to make. And so it's got a lot of stuff. If you order into it, there's just a ton of stuff. And it's very, very useful for me. This is the first area I was interested in, strategic and tactical deployments of objects and phenomena, and I needed to study that. So I made this area of the drawing first to study that in abstraction, incorporated some of the thinking back into the drawing itself. And then there's a technical drawing. These are just the architectural components. There are landscape components. There are conditions that get flooded. There are landscape conditions which just wander and grow in different ways and so on. I continued then thinking through the architectural drawing and a proposal for a competition for a museum, which I also didn't hear. I used to get competition briefs and pay for them and then not submit them. So anyway, I developed for myself a whole taxonomy of different drawing types. This I call a thematic drawing. It basically articulates the key ideas or interests in the development of the museum. The import of the Greek muses, collections and taxonomies, viewing, audience constructions, lots of things to do with museums. So that's a sort of visual construct, just the idea. So I can get them out right here because I've got a lot of stuff going on in projects usually. So the visual corollary to my brain was really helpful. Then I made a series of drawings for the museum that I called cryptic site drawings. And they're like the chromosomes for the museum, but they're not material and they're not formal. They're just relationally indicative or emblematic of what I might do. So that's one of them. This is another one of them. They're quite intense. I also like the construction lines where templates are, how I mark things, locate templates, construction lines. Those all can matter to me as well. So I sometimes cultivate relationships that come out of the construction of the drawing. And then there are a series of drawings that I call proto-formal drawings. So there's a large alabaster surface in the museum proposals that's outside. And there are 9 drawing instruments which etch away, draw, tickle that alabaster surface based on the 9 Greek muses and their performative characteristics. That stuff falls into a crypt, the dust falls into a crypt, and then the crypt moves around the site according to the dynamics of audiences on the site itself. So this is an isolated drawing for a particular part. And then I make things like this is a kind of proto-sectional drawing for the key building piece. So there are things like harvesting tables, muses, there are gallery pieces. There's an archive for objects which never existed, and so on. And then we made a former student, a couple of years later, we made just a quick sketch model of what that might be like. So I've been interested in erasure, subtraction, erasure, flattening, bleaching out as an architectural activity. Architects generally add things, add value, add drawings, add material. So I got interested in this project in 2003 in erasure. So I made a series of drawings in which I was just studying erasure and recoding the erase marks because I was going to design a house in which I essentially erased furniture, practices, thresholds, programs, and then rebooted those erased conditions with a pair of what I call reflexive objects, which would come back in and reboot the erased conditions. So anyway, these drawings are just about working on erasure and recoding. So I make a whole series of marks in graphite. Could have to do with outlets, a piece of furniture, a piano, a threshold between one space and another. There are a set of base marks. And then I systematically go back and work and rework them through erasure and recoding. So, there's a hand lettered, and there are just all kinds of cut pieces, filament tape. So there's a lot, and I'm getting better in the work. There's no outside world when I work properly. There's no outside world. That's world. Anyway, I never completed this house, but I would like to. I'll never go back to it. Anyway, I was working hard, but slowly. And I thought in cycling you have a bunch of muscles, but fast and slow twitch muscles are something that you have. And I raced on the road and had really, really good slow twitch muscles, but not fast twitch. So I said, I wonder if I could make a house based on fast twitch muscles, move quickly through it. And I used analogous thinking to do that. So the site is structured like an empty game board. There are things like petticoats. There are things like angels with so a lot of likenesses. Anyway, when I also work properly, there are always yellow tablet drawings. So in the island, I'm taking 125 of these. The sketchbook. I don't have sketchbooks. I've never had. I don't sketch. Maybe I sort of draw. Anyway, there are about 50 of these from this particular project. So then I made a series of drawings. There are a series of the ideas. I started simply. I said ground, sky, and horizon. That's it. That's it, PK. That's all you're going to work on. And all of a sudden, I've got hybrid archetypes. I have things to do with ancient cultures, hidden languages, and so on. Anyway, there's an idea in the project that there are a series of milling machines. This is 2004. So 20 years ago, there are milling machines that are milling the desert landscape. And they mill garden surfaces that have inscribed particular languages in those garden surfaces. So descriptively, this is a house, and But there are the milled garden surfaces. So there are a lot of them. There's a pink dust garden. There's a caretaker for the pink dust garden. You sleep in an angelfish-like piece that moves back and forth slightly erratically when no one's there. There's a dining space that has a bit that's inside of it. It comes out occasionally. This is a living space that's filled with logs. I'll show you it. So you live in a pair of baskets on the outside of it. And this dematerializes over 100 years. It's made of steel, and the logs are part of the site. There's a labyrinth with a red object that you never see but hear. There's a small cast biplane, bronze biplane, miniature. There's a chromed billiard ball. And then there are 3 chromed shadows for the key objects. So it looks like this. I won't go into the content, but you see the chrome shadows and the inscribed garden surfaces and the sleeping space, and this is where you eat and so on. So again, a sketch model. This would take, to get this somewhere would be another 300 hours probably, 300-400 hours to get this. Yeah, it wouldn't look like this. This is where you sleep. They're cuckoo-like clock sleeping chambers. This is a stair that goes nowhere. It's 3 inches wide up there, and it's full width down here. Storage sacks that are like umbilical things. Yeah. There are faults in real cacti here's the cactus ones. Here's the chrome billiard ball, about 8 feet high. And this is the faith, the living space. You live in a pair of baskets here and one over there. It's filled with logs. And then there's a small version of the proposal built on the side of it. This is the labyrinth. And then there's a mechanical hawk that belongs to this. So you guys absolutely insane. The mechanical hawk and small versions of the proposal built it. Anyway, this is what we made quick studies for it. And been invited, been very, very grateful, fortunate, happy to be invited to a bunch of things. So about 2 weeks after our doctoral school, I was invited to the Robert International Art Biennale in Prague, and asked to do with architecture as a transient phenomenon. That was my program. So we made, with two former students, we made a 15-foot long puzzle-like drawing. This is the base. This is the digital base. And then I gold leaf things and drew things and had cut paper and so on. And we sent it over. And it's based on animal species and interrelationships of their navigational and creation attitudes and so on. Just trying to figure out if there was a way to work transitionally or in a transient way with true animal-like behaviors. In the Metasphere, so excuse me. At Michigan, we used to have things called research to making grants. You put a proposal in, it was weighed against others, and I got fortunate to win one. It could be up to $20,000. Also, don't do this. I spent $4,000 and basically gave $16,000 back to the school. They didn't give me the money, but I didn't use $16,000. So I was doing 106 other things and couldn't figure out a way to do it. So I was interested in breeding landscape types, formal gardens, meandering gardens, out gardens, with landscape elements, lawns, dikes, revetments, fences, crossed with landscape biologies, insect infestations, growths, and so on, to see if I could produce an architecture that learned from the landscape in terms of its temporal structure. So we made tons of images. This is the ceiling of the El Jesu that we're trying to breed, spatially bloom. They're fabric predators. There are a series of analogic drawings that we made, zipper blooms. There are real indexical and notational landscapes that exist simultaneously. So these are some studies for that. And then we made some final images, test tube berms and fabric predators and indexical, notational, and real landscapes and so on. These are some of the images of that work. Again, I was invited by a dear friend, Gretchen Wilkins, who heads Cranbrook Architecture now. And I think there were 30 of us again, and everybody got 2 pages in a book to deal with documenting urbanism. So I was interested in surpluses and urban conditions, harvesting those. So I produced 2 pages called Alchemic Urbanism, and I used it was a very difficult lead, and the books, books were that big, but try to carefully think about using language, using graphic structure, using figural pieces and so on to try to think about harvesting surpluses in cities. I'm a little bit all over the map when I work on stuff. So I got interested in the National Geographic photographs of the Titanic and made a series of drawings where I started to autopsy essentially the Titanic, and I never finished the work of the, well, in the case, my middle name. There were a series of ocean surfaces in oceans that would attract and enable the habitation of sea animals, orphan sea animals in particular. They were talking with satellites and rockets and meteors and so forth and so on. So I didn't finish that, but that were still interesting. A good friend of mine, Jim Barton, asked me to make a cover for a new journal called Edge Condition that she was making, and asked me to make a cover for it. So it's called Cloud Veil, and I essentially take my work and try to erase it in 3 different ways as a way to produce the cover. Erasure again. You may know Jan Johannes Vermeer's The Art of Painting. And I wondered if by making a series of drawings to do with erasure, if I could discover the art of architecture through erasure. So I just used this as a parent essentially, and then worked on a whole series of drawings to deal with that. Interest in art of architecture through erasure. So my friend Coy Howard was a very, very close friend and has taught at Sarah for probably 45 years now. Great architect. When we moved downtown, I taught in all 3 of Sarah's locations. And when we moved downtown to the train depot where the school is now, we both sort of picked up the phone. I never collaborated with anybody at that point. And we both sort of picked up the phone and said, do you want to do a piece of work together now that we're downtown as a way to discover downtown? I didn't know much about downtown. So we identified 7 projects. It was a big floating park market over Broadway. There were a series of sonic monuments. There were a series of public event spaces. And then ultimately what we worked on 8 speculative rooftop houses. And a bunch of ideas for each one of them, but I finally drew them. We did these in 2001 and 2 and a little bit through. But I finally drew them a couple of years ago. So these are just bad images of the my drawing tape, me working on those houses. They're really, really different. They have different kinds of ideas. They're incredibly different with respect to what they're about. Anyway, these are just work. This is me drawing, trying to finalize. We had rolls, it's thick rolls of trace and technical drawings that I'd done. Tons of drawings. Anyway, just try to bring them to a final state. I got interested in building envelopes, basically, so I made a series of drawings of 6, and 2 completed. So these drawings have to do with vertical surfaces of architectures, and it uses some of my David's Island work and some of the other things that I used to make drawings. And then there's one that's complete now that's based on medical imaging technology. So I wondered if X-rays and MRIs, those kinds of things could produce a kind of an envelope for an architecture. This is part of work that has to do with dismantling the picture plane as the dominant mode of expression. So there's a floor triptych, a 3-part drawing that's part of the floor, and then there's a ceiling equivalent of that. So it's not about the picture plane, it's about these 2 things discussing one another. Anyway, these are the cut paper bits. There's a mylar construction of it and so on. And Hollow, I mentioned Matt and I were fortunate enough to win the Pamphlet Architecture 34. Their proposal had to do with indeterminacy and contingent architecture. That is architecture that doesn't predict what you do, but puts out kinds of evidence so you can co-construct and take ownership of an architecture. That was the interest. The primary interest was really to develop a friendship. We've never lived, the closest we lived to one another, Ann Arbor and Winnipeg. So he's been in Ann Arbor, Copenhagen, Ann Arbor, and Brighton, and now London, teaches at the Harvard. So we made a body of work. I made a series of drawings to try to work on this problem of contingency. And that was at work on other things. And then we came together. So I made 5 of these drawings. And ultimately, we then learned from Matt's. Matt's super interesting guy, very, very smart, incredibly close friend and colleague. When I was the Bannister Fletcher visiting professor at the Bartlett 4 years ago, I interacted with Unit 25, which Emma-Kate and Matt teach in until this year, there was less. Anyway, we made, as a way to develop our friendship, to work on contingent practices, and so on, we made a pair of drawing instruments that are linked to Matt's development, ongoing development in drawing instruments. And I'll show you in a couple of exhibitions that we've had, in which some of his, they're featured. Anyway, they basically throw paint at one another. And they each have a narrative piece. They have something which interrupts the paint flow, and then they have a drawing. So each of us have those. That's mine, that's Matt's world, and this is mine. And there are lots of inscribed meanings. It's not just willy-nilly, well, we'll just do what we want to do. Anyway, then Mark Stanley, who designed pamphlet architecture for us, composited some time-lapse photographs of the paint throws. And here's the paint thrower. Here's the object that's inscribed with meaning that interrupts the paint flow and so on. And then, as I mentioned, we were fortunate to have 2 exhibitions. We did a month-long workshop in Winnipeg, and we got a very, very, very beautiful space to have. The workshop was just here, and we put on an exhibition of our work as our collective work here. And then mostly I wanted to show you some of Matt's work, which is around also the drawing instruments. There's one of them. They're phenomenal, and he's like a bulldog. When he gets onto something, there's not a chance he's going to let it go. So he's worked with these drawing instruments and cameras and folding picture planes and prone paint and false shadows, floating shadows, and so on. It's brilliant work. He's a super good, he's a very, very good friend. And anyway, this is part of the exhibition. When I was a visiting professor, the Bannister Fletcher visiting professor, Bob Shield, who was the director of the school, gave us essentially the ground floor to stage an exhibition. So these are some of the images. They built all the walls, the painting, the bases, and so on for the exhibition. So we were in 3 primary spaces. This is a small space that we were in. Really grateful to the school to us. Next stage the work. So it's fast twitch drawings. It's maybe 6 feet high and 9 feet wide canvas. Now I alluded to my lack of digital skills in 2018. Late at night, one night I said, I wonder if I could make some speculative house gardens and landscapes and learn a couple of Photoshop tools. I mean, literally, I couldn't even clip something. I couldn't transform something. So I made 155 of these, about an hour a piece. And they allow me to enlarge my material vocabulary. I think about landscapes, houses, and gardens in different ways now. They're made very, very quickly. I feel like I'm accomplishing something, and we're working on it at midnight, midnight to 1 when I finish, doing other things. Anyway, they're related to the landscape series. One of these, an hour. I'm not saying do this, but you can definitely you can make some headway with one thing a day. Anyway, so sometimes I take a drawing of mine and then I find other things that interest me, and I just work with them. my eyes and my hands get tuned. My imagination is alive and well. Anyway, I mean, I was thinking 5 days. I'll just
No,
show you.
you already asked me. I talked about it.
I said, can you not tell her to?
I didn't tell her. She asked me, so I gave my opinion.
Yeah, why did you tell her to?
I didn't tell her. She asked me what I think, and I gave my opinion.
And why did you say that you thought she should block it?
Because you can focus on the.
Okay.
Permanency for you, Carrie. Made determinacy for you there. Yes, a surrealist, indeterminate insertion. I like it. Yeah. I got a new project just in. Anyway, so they're just a bunch of these. And this should be fun to make, and I would encourage just do one thing a day, and I don't know, but there were about a dozen of them that I think are interesting, and my friend Jeff Halstead, I'll show you in a minute, we developed 3 of them. So this is using one of the houses with koi, and you're just reworking it and the plant. And this is my drawings. These are pretty good. And also, this is just my work that turns back on itself like they were around it. Same thing. So this is that vertical surface. Turn sideways, worked on, number of other things inserted into the equation and so on. Just found, it's all Photoshop, just found parts of my drawings that get tweaked, and it's a motorcycle. One of the erased drawings, it gets reworked. Fun. One of the other vertical surface is there, and then just worked on. Almost finished with these 35 of them. And as I mentioned, my good friend Jeff Halstead saw some of them, and he said, let's do he's a brilliant guy, but he's digitally super skilled. So he said, let's use ZBrush, see what we could do. So the drawing looks like that. And a very, very quick proposal of what this house garden landscape might be like, looks like that. So the drawing looks like that. And then these are some iterations of what that could become. You just say formally. It's not full work. It's not, it's not considered it. It's considered like 1.5 of 13 ways of thinking about a piece of work. Anyway, we've made some final images then of that work, and then this is actually 2 of the houses, gardens, and landscapes that have a relationship with Ireland. So the yellow is one, and the black, white, and blue is sort of talking with each other. And then another version of that. More Photoshop work. An idea about landscape objects that were quasi-architectural. So I just made a series of these. Again, just Photoshop bits. And what I ultimately got interested in, I'm super clanky with Photoshop. I mean, I'm absolute Neanderthal. But I'm interested in how I use Photoshop to produce certain kinds of effects. So I got less interested in this and way more interested in these kinds of things. So, keep my periscope up for where things might move and what might interest me. And the last drawing I made was actually this one, which keeps track of a number of different miscues by me in one of the studies. So that interests me. And it's pretty fun. I got invited to design again, 30 architects, I think, design a birdhouse for auction for a nonprofit in Italy. This is 2015, so 3 former thesis students have just finished I asked them if they wanted to work on us, and we produced 13 proposals, and we picked one of them. And then we made a series of what we call inspirational drawings that have ambitions or aspirations attached to them, but are not the work. So we made a series of those, and then one of the guys, the other two got jobs, real jobs, and so on. Anyway, then we made we made a physical a thing, and the white ellipse is about the size of a large dinner plate. So to give you a sense of it, and I like to tell this story. This piece is 3D printed. It's this piece, $300, right? We get it back. We thought we had everything dialed in. The wings are thinner than paper. We said, that's probably not going to make it to Italy in a walk. So we quadrupled, made another $300 out of pocket. This is all out of pocket, $2,700 out of pocket. And I paid the guys as well. Anyway, we made another one of them that was substantial, and then sent it to Italy. Anyway, this is a kind of a spiritual bird, kind of totem. This is a bird landing strip. This is the garden for the birds. There are false hedges. There are artificial clouds. There's a windsock one. It's called the Flights of Fancy Bird Motel. There's some surveillance equipment. There are bird perches and bird lighting board. And this is where they eat. Whoops. This is the spiritual bird. And it deals with different aspects of bird life. This is where they eat. There's a bird walk. And this is where they eat. And that's what it looks like. And then we made a series of drawings based on that one that were slightly surrealist and inspiration to try to resituate them, the bird motel, in some other situation to see if we could draw other interests out. Another member of the drawing architecture group, my good friend Northwest, was talking with him over dinner in London and said, he said, what about the bird motel? And I said, I thought of it as an ecology, not a fixed hygienic thing. And he said, let's do a collaboration and work on that. If you don't know Mark West's work, it's totally awesome. His site is called survivinglogic.com. And anyway, we then we made a series of phase drawings that think about what this would become. And this is essentially the ultimate state. So he uses drawings of mine, he uses a very motel image, he uses some photography things, and some Mark is a phenomenally talented character. He developed the lab called CAST at the University of Manitoba, where they dealt with fabric form concrete. Very beautiful work, extraordinarily. So we then did, with another former thesis student, we did a second bird motel called UIdaho. And because I didn't have any money and I paid people who work with me, we decided to use pieces of the initial bird motel. So I then made a drawing of that sort of spirit the work, and then we redesigned it, and then worked on a series of images for it. So it's interested in human, non-human things, skies, things to do with ethics. So there are things like there is a stuffed technology garden with a fireplace. So all of those things are kitted out in floral material for the birds, rockets, satellites, planes, and so on. So there's a stuffed technology garden. It has bird perches. It has a berry festival. There are dancing topiary bird alphabet hedges that move a track on tracking devices, and they inscribe. There's a dome below. They inscribe languages on the bird ballroom dome. It has dioramic wallpaper for the birds that forecast distant geographies in which the bird motels might travel and so on. So there are a lot of versions of this. And anyway, these are These are, this is where the birds, this is talisman, this is where the birds eat. And there's an homage, there's a sail. It's an homage to Wallace Stevens' 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And this is the step technology garden, this fountain, and it has a Dynaxian map rug, and it has a fireplace, and then all the floral aerial things are done in plant material, floral things for the birds. And then the bird perches. Then we made some final images of which we're trying to tell stories. So these are modeled, they're model pieces that you can see in the drawings, but they're also then they're worked with cut paper and Photoshop technique to basically tell stories about the bird themselves. There are a bunch of versions. There's a single version, there's a version and a half, there's a double version. There are different material characteristics. This surface changes its material qualities as it moves through different environments. This surface, this big surface. So you see the plan view of another here, and this is one of them. And there's a miniature berry festival. It's the bird table here. This is where they eat. And the dancing topiary hedges and ways in which they move on that surface and so on. Then the idea is for the book to do 13 bird motels. So this is the third one, and it's called Sky Ranger. And it basically 3D prints Wallace Stevens' poems in the sky. It does a lot of other things, and there are lots of versions to it, but this is worked on with another former student, Colin. Anyway, it has a working log, has an artificial weather garden, it has a zoetropic restaurant that flies with it, it has a talisman that keeps an eye on things, it has a theater, it has housing, and those are the primary elements. And this is there's one other element. This is the artificial weather garden for the birds. This realm, and then there's the housing. You see up there the theaters on the nose of it, and 3D printing forms and so on. And then there's a diving board for the birds, and there's an homage to Logier's primitive hut for different reasons. All the stuff has there are meaningful choices that we're making, but I'm just describing really what things are. So this is the working log, and there are lots of things that come out of that working log. It's constantly changing and so on. Again, there are different versions of it. Then we're just starting on a fourth one. It's called Tugboat. It's sort of a blue collar one. The other ones are a little bit uppity, a little bit fancy. This one's on the ground. So we're just working on we did a very, very quick model, and then we did a kind of thematic study. Some things to do with panoramas and dioramas and things that get pulled by a tugboat and so on, just an early study. So we're just getting going on that. And I made then in 2017, Nat Shard and I were going to make a piece of work at a place called Orford Ness, which is on the coast of England, and they used to test basically military ballistics. It's beautiful. It's a sand spit. It's probably 8 miles long, ruins, and so on. We were going to make a project. We went out there and spent a day photographing. Anyway, I made what I called there's an analogic drawings, likenesses, for what I call aerial diptych follies. So the follies are 2-part diptych. There's an entertainment part, and then there's a surveillance part. The entertainment part, and then the surveillance part, and so on. Fine. Those are cut paper. We'll make it in 24 inches, 18 inches. And then I got some seed funding from the school. When I pitched, I was interested in the relationship between an image of something and digital modeling. So we worked in Blender to probe questions about relationships between an image and digital modeling, asking questions like, what about file sizes? Can you model light sources? What about the operations, the sequential operations in Blender? Can that become part of this world? So We then, these are all made in Blender. Every single thing is modeled. We're modeling parts of images. Everything is modeled. Mostly from scratch. So there's a fair bit of work and in them. Each of the three has been a particular focus. This one was meant to be a kind of theatrical setting. And these are some of the final images we worked on. We're interested in things like that view is that view. So there's information shared in the wireframe in relationship to the rendering. We got interested in those kinds of questions. That wireframe lies inside of this, or is it vice versa? Those are the kinds of things, sort of think tank questions that we got interested in. Anyway, these are they're super fun. 2018, we're making them, Oliver and I were making them at the same time as the Wallace Stevens Bird Motel, two separate characters working. So some images from that one. And then this one, we were interested in not so much the aerodiptic folly, but the inflection, the produced field around it. And then, again, this is the workspace that we care about the potential of literally everything in that workspace. Cropping, get file sizes, RGB, CMYK, trying to see if there's potential there. So these are renderings. These are straight up renderings of the final. Everything's modeled. And again, this one cares less about that. It cares more about the production of this space. And you see one of Carl's bird motels occupying, sort of fiddling around with this piece of work. So we made made a series of views of it. And then the last one is interested. This is probably the most demonstrative workspace in terms of where we're finding potential. And the reason I got interested in this is this seems more akin to my drawing table workspace, where construction lines and pieces of tape and things that are around can be in play. That's how I originally got interested in image visual modeling work. This has been a recent cover of AD of the Drawing Architecture Group. We're very grateful to have it on the cover. Anyway, these are renderings of that final area of the big folly proposal. I always like to talk about this. This is roughly my drawing, and that's a piece of cut paper. So we wondered if the images have backsides. There's the cut paper. There's the backside of that piece of cut paper in our world. And then there's the front side of that piece of paper. So that piece of paper in our queries, like is that. And then this one's interested not in the devices and instruments that do certain things relative to this setting. So these are some of the final images. The best part. Friendly fire. And then I'm interested in histories of different kinds. In this case, I was interested in triptych paintings, Baroque domes, and still lifes from the Dutch Golden Age. And I wondered if I could take those precedents, important backgrounds for myself, and reconvene those things to maybe breathe new life into them. So there are 3 strategies. The last strategy has 6 strategies in that third strategy. So the first one is called niche. And it takes things like Mesa's Barcelona Pavilion, Borromini's San Carlo, the Noli map, a Turkish city that doesn't exist, a Chinese scroll painting, shrines at Ise, and so on. It takes those things and puts them into a kind of theatrical window setting like world, which is this. Everything's modeled except the Noli plan. That's Borromini's church reworked. We digitally modeled the church with serious support, and then we basically took it apart, and angels reconstruct it. There's a house for angels reconstruct. that church, and then there are all kinds of other things, shrines of Isay, Turkish cities, Chinese scroll paintings and so on that belong to this setup. So this is the first setup to try to look at the important precedents, architectural, mostly Western, sadly again, to see if we could rethink precedents, not through a postmodernist idiom, but through, in this case, staging them. So we made a whole series of images. That's what the setup looks like. That's what the digital setup looks like. And then we made another series of images looking at mirror distortions. And, that got super interesting, both representationally, technically, but also in terms of the consequences and the forms of knowledge construction that came out of those mirror constructions. Then we did a second strategy, which is called knolling, and knolling is, you know, knolling, just organizing things. So if you had a tool bench, you'd have sort of drill-like things over here, you'd have sort of file-like things over here, you'd have hammers. So it's just an organizational structure. So we took the same elements, we introduced a few new characters, some gardening equipment, and a few animals. And we then produced, using the same the Baroque churches and shrines of Isay and Chinese scroll paintings and so on. We basically produced then another version. This is called Borromini's Table. It's a small part of the overall project, but so it's quite intricate. The work is quite intricate in terms of meaning, significance, content. This is a very small part of the larger setup. This is Borromini's church in plan. There are other Baroque churches. Things like Turkish mosques get tagged and coded and reconstructed. One of the shrines at Isay also on that table. The dome itself, the Borromini's church is reconstructed in two of these here. Then there are other Baroque churches, and then all, you know, the other things are here. There are angels that get flattened and develop as topographic things that come out of churches, produce a landscape, and so on. Then we're trying to work on some final images that aren't descriptive like the ones that I just showed are. So we're just working on a series of them now to see, try to finish the work. None of it's finished. We just run out of money, and Kyle works for LTL in New York, and no time and so on. So we just try to cobble things together, and I see these are some of the images we're just working on. And then there's the third strategy in which we reconstruct a great garden of Rio Anchi that I alluded to in the David's Island. We reconstruct that garden. So we reconstructed it with those characters, and it wasn't very interesting. So we know this. That's what we do. We model the sky, That's super interesting. This piece of work, how do you model the sky? Exactly. Anyway, so we got here and said, that's not interesting. So we then, there were 6 strategies within that overall conception of the garden. This is one of them that's like a Hollywood backlot. And then in that strategy, there are a series of erasures and critical fragments that are chosen to point to the garden as a part of the strategy. And there's some real just critical fragment strategy things that are done. Then we got interested in the nocturnal realm, and we modeled Illustrator, we modeled Rhino, we modeled Photoshop to try to see if there was a way to rethink those precedents through basically digital modeling in the nocturnal realm. And then we took one of my bleached out drawings and thought about it as a construction site. So this one, that drawing and series of model pieces got modeled. And then there are a series of images that, again, all the pieces are here, all the original bits are in play here somewhere. But this is seen as a construction site. Then we made a series, these are the most telling images, I think. This is what I think the garden would be more like. So we use representation, critical fragments, plans, elevation, pieces, econometric things to rebuild the garden representationally. And I think these are closer to what I imagined. So we use representation as a critical method to reflect on what we had designed to now set up what we would design if we had more time. Does that make sense? Right. So these images are, I think, are the most critical images of this strategy. And then we develop a series, another strategy where we use representation on representation to see if we can uncork some possibilities. So these drawings are that, and I'm almost finished. So that's that. Then when I work, I got a lot of stuff going on usually, a lot. So I wondered if in a project I could get 20% of the representational and spatial work to do 80% of the spatial work in terms of content. So I made a series of called 2080. I made a series of drawings that are not programs, they're not architecture, they're just indications about loaded fragments that would do certain kinds of work, and then other empty spaces or construction lines might have a much quieter contribution to the work. So I made 4 of these in a 24 by 36. Fun. I'd like to develop this, but I won't probably. And the drawing architecture group had an exhibition, book launch, and other things in Montreal. February. Anyway, Matt and we used our projects to produce a set of images for that exhibition using our work. So these are some of the preparatory, try to work very quickly because we're both super busy. These are some of the preparatory images. And then we made some final images, which we printed and were part of the exhibition. And these are those images. And then just a couple more projects. I've been interested in, as I've alluded to, our sort of directly on and important things in the world. So in this project, it's called 3 Paintings, and I'm interested in famous paintings, Caravaggio's Narcissus, Raphael's School of Athens, and Vermeer's Art of Painting. And they basically interact with 3 animal-like objects and transform one another, the paintings and the objects. So it's not a space for humans. Humans would never go here. Anyway, so I made this is a kind of a planish drawing, things move, and there are calibration systems in the floor. These things change over and through time as do the paintings. Then I made kind of an elevation-ish, planish. So that's one of the paintings and interacting with one of the objects. And then these are very preliminary. So there's no ceiling, there aren't any walls. It's at the moment, it's a bit more like this, just one of the objects starting to interact with one of the paintings and vice versa. So yeah, these are recent. And then same character working on what I call 6.5 arcs, and they're big for the Midwest. They'd be lovely between here, lovely. We would cite them between here and Spokane and Greenfields, for example. Anyway, the key idea is they talk to Google Earth and satellite images. They house orphan animals. They make inscriptions in the landscape, sort of hidden languages, seasonal languages. They're a bit billboard-like, drive-in theater-like. So they're multifunctioning sort of hybrid objects, and they started just quickly modeled one of them. These are really preliminary studies. This is where the animals get housed on the back of one of the arcs. And this is related to Carl Linnaeus, who's the guy who developed taxonomy and classification systems, a Swedish character. This is basically a model of a city where he grew up in Sweden. that began to produce early takes on where the animals would stay. So that's one of the arcs in scribed languages. And just quick, this is a long way to go. And then the last piece of work I'll show you is called Ghost Gifting in Gigabytes. And I was invited to the Chicago Architecture Biennial, and that opens in 5 weeks. So we're working on Chicago, planetary and global skies, histories of Chicago, non-binary things, fakes, dupes, copies, lots of things at stake. So these are very quick generative images for the work. They're a combination of mid-journey, digital modeling, and sort of drawn parts. So these are just to get the foundations built for the work. And then there's maybe a big triptych drawing and a table. So we're just trying to get a feel. So the images will ultimately, there'll be probably 30 images in a big, almost Gardner birthday device like triptych. And the images are sort of this quality, different settings and pieces, rooftops and rivers and so on. So that's good. So thank you all very much for coming up. Do you have any question? I'll just this across the computer. My work is already. Yeah.
Hey, Gary, thanks for the generous talk and the generous. I guess I'm thinking about. My question really just is about some distance from your own work, but a question about like finish. And I think I kept hearing it's not finished, and towards the end you said, well, they're never finished, but we run out of money or we have to put it up. But at the same time, there is a kind of moment where when you're in the work, and then a moment when you're more distance from the work, when it's disseminated or displayed, right? And it may or may not be related, but I was thinking also about this morning, is there a tension between like the generative and the discretionary? And so I'm curious for yourself, like those moments when you step out. I mean, there is something implicit about judgment, right? Like, there's all this information to go in, there's all these methods, but at the same time, there's still your judgment. So it's not like it's
a nice observation, question. So the reason I always say that things are unfinished is like if I try to get around work at 13 levels, I would need to take on, for me, there are 5 key audiences. Let's say there's a cultural audience, there's a disciplinary audience, there's an institutional audience, there's a personal audience, and then there's a situational audience. So to be able to make judgments and evaluations, proposals, judgments, evaluations, reflections about those levels alone would cause me concern in terms of finishing a piece of work, because they're simply not working at enough levels for the work to be durable. That's part of it. And then there's the question about discretion in relationship to
the generative. I mean,
yeah,
that might be more back towards this one.
So I don't think of the work that I'm doing now when we work on digital modeling, for example. I don't think of that work as generative, really. I think of it's more a kind of tit for tat. It's more immediate in terms of analogous relationships or certain things that we could say, it would be like this, or let's use this. So there's no latent knowledge really constructed in a lot of those, or tacit knowledge or implicit knowledge, because there's an immediacy to imaging, modeling imaging relative to the ideas and say, okay, this is that, this stands for that, this structures that. So in that case, I think of those, the former students are extremely talented, they're totally invested in the work. So it doesn't have anything to do with their skill sets and their commitment, but the work relative to 13 ways of looking at it, for me, is quite impoverished, I would say. And it's not because I'm not doing the work, it's just that it hasn't found its bearing amongst other levels of discretion, judgment, interest, transformation. They're more, this is the first model, and let's work on that basically. So there's those I don't think of as generative, but when I'm working at my table, I think of those as much more suggestive, generative, because I will allow hunches and certainties and things that might not make any sense at all to co-occupy things that I'm certain about. So those have much more promiscuity. They, when I say call it talk surface evidence, they feel like clues in which there might be a lot of metaphorical crimes, not the pictorial crimes that we're committing in the last bodies of work that are digitally modeled. So I'm not sure I'm answering that question. I like the observation and question. I'm trying to sort it out. One of the reasons that the digital modeling is difficult is there's the immediacy of the work. There's a sense of confidence. We modeled it, therefore it is. So it doesn't, for me, digital modeling doesn't have a way to naturally ask questions of itself. Digital modeling is super interesting. Coding, processing, all scripting, all those things are really interesting to me. I wish I had the skills. But there's nothing in front of or in back of that work generally to me. That's what it is. The status is that. So it's not suggestive. It doesn't open itself up generally. It opens itself up to refinement, but not transformation, let's say. So the earlier work when I'm working, and it's not that I know what I'm doing when I work on my table, but there's just a lot at stake there where I can weigh in and out. There are things that I'm certain again and not certain about. They're just much more inventive in terms of how my imagination occupies intention or construction lines or template marking or whatever. But I think the matter of being unfinished is not a question. Indeterminacy, I'm interested in indeterminacy and emergence and becoming and all of those things. Those are they're to do with being unfinished, but not unfinished in the sense that it's a developmental unfinished. It's a things or structured clues, partial accounts, things that open themselves up where we can co-construct worlds within those worlds. And in the digital models, they don't have those things. They don't have those things for me. They're basically images. I'm not uninterested in the work. I think it's decent work generally, but it doesn't have the feedback loops, the strange sideways glances, how did I end up over here? They don't have any of that sort of in terms of generative discretion, judgment, finished. But I don't have any time. I'm involved in just a lot of things, and I don't have. I've drawn 3 hours in the last 15 months since I moved into my last drawing house. I've drawn 3 hours of my drawing table, and I've got things 7 days a week, which I'm really doing something. So yeah. Anyway, nice. Yeah, thank you. Yes, please.
I guess I just have one thought on that. It's unfinished isn't necessarily a bad thing. That like practically any, I guess, architectural drawing that doesn't have a building to show for it is unfinished, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have value.
Capacity, potential, yeah.
Process of working through options and exploring ideas is still valuable in itself, even if never necessarily like you said, find its footing. It's still important as designers to kind of work through this.
Sure. Your name is
Aaron.
So one of those conceptual catalysts, those little word ditties, one of them is what would happen if we built the space of the building's construction rather than the building? So the processes, cranes lifting stuff into play, weather systems moving through it, dogs barking, trash running across the site. What if we built that, the construction of the thing rather than the thing? I'm more interested in that than the building, probably the architecture, in terms of the generative capacity of things which are unfinished or indeterminate or ambiguous. That's more interesting for me in my imagination, the things I like to populate and think about. Just more interesting for me to think about materializing the space of the building's construction rather than a building, which is, I think, sort of analogously related to what the question or observation that you made. I should also say that I don't mistake me for the University of Michigan, or I don't think everybody's me. That's probably true. Other questions or thoughts on this, please, and then I come. Your name is.
So I guess your work to me seems to want to encourage people to broaden their horizons. And you mentioned that like you see a lot of architectural education as stale, and your work, I guess, to me seems like a response to that. I guess, what do you hope people get out of your work when they see your work? Like what's the most important thing for you to kind of give to people through your work?
Probably that we can reframe the world as we know it through pieces of work. I think great work. I'm saying it was great by any stretch of the imagination. I think I have some decent work. I think often, whether it's philosophical, speculations, mathematics, physical things, art, things that reframe what we take for granted, is important to me. And if my work, someone in the world could allow them to open up what they assume as a default position, and that would feel like a contribution to me. I'm not trying to make weird work. I think my work is super conservative, to be honest. Any ideas are they're not insightful ideas. Sometimes the combinations of ideas and the ways that I work on things, but maybe something that the work seems basically all the same to me. And it's been really, really stressful for me in the last 2 or 3 years. That I'm not working, and that I'm not sure I've done a really good piece of work. And I'm happy, delighted that I've been able to publish and lecture and exhibit things and so on, but if I didn't, it wouldn't matter a drop to me. If I could make a piece of work that I said, this is what you trained to do, and you actually did it. I'm super happy that people do come to talks and so on. I'm humbled by it. But at the end of the day, for me as a designer, if I could just make one piece of work that reframed my world, so okay, that's good enough. Your name is Don. Don. Thank you for the question observation. What's your name is
Connor.
Yeah.
This is kind of related to what you were asking about with them, but I was just curious. I think it's fair to say a lot of your work seems to have a lot of different inspirations and a lot of different balls in the air. I was curious kind of what your curation process is. Like, does there ever come a point where you say that's one thing too many, or do you try to embrace it? Like, how does that kind of work in your head?
Yeah, it's a super good observation question. So I'm interested in lots of things. One of them would be things like curiosity cabinets, in which things that don't belong together can coexist. There's some ambiguities and multiplicities and emergence and cultural histories being referred to and so on. So a lot of things. One of the problems I think is that I try to do too much in a piece of work. So if I were to scarily, if I were to build something, my guess is that things would cross cancel one another. So there was very little being offered communicatively. Things were there was so much going on that the onus would be on someone participating with it to sort out what mattered, how long it mattered, when it mattered relative to the other things that matter. So I worry that's partially an outcome of the earlier layered drawings, where that's an open American Express card. There are no breaks on that. Those could be 1,000 layers, no problem. So the curational aspect of discretion is a very, very useful question. So I try to make judgments about what's situationally relevant in the scope of a piece of work. How much can it take on? in the situation in which I'm working. Situation might be an XYZ coordinate system, might be, image and digital modeling, but I try to sort out the scope. The scope is the ultimate question for me. The scope, how much work should a piece of work be responsible for? The scope. I was in school, I was in your seats, the program in the site. Sometimes the context basically set the scope of work. That's what the work was about. As I grew older, I realized, as a result of looking at Renaissance things, paintings, Baroque churches, and so on, the architecture could do a fair bit more work than a functional program in a site response and so on. So anyway, those drawings then got me into a place where I could just hold a lot of things in place simultaneously. And what happened is I essentially made still lifes. You see a lot of still lifes, figures and grounds. So because I couldn't work out, there were so many things going on relationally, I couldn't work out how to stitch them. So there were essentially a whole series of separate settings that structured that series of ideas, that idea, that idea. And they ultimately are not talking with one another in ways that the drawings surmise or believe they can. So then the opposite problem is in the digital modeling, they're all figures and grounds, and then they have very limited ways in which you can generate backdoor conversations, things that they might be whispering to one another, things that they don't say but might say. So there's little chance in the still life settings of some of the recent work. I'm just interested in lots of things. And I said this morning, I didn't have a curiosity or an imagination if I was in your American Columbia or an undergrad. I didn't have them. And I realized that when I got exposed to the art world in New York City, and the Met and Guggenheim and Bowman and so on, there were a fair number of things that one could get interested in that I had no idea about. I'd probably never been to a museum until I turned up in Columbia. Anyway, so I got interested in cultural histories and things, and just interested in learning and constructing an education. So that's part of why I'm piling stuff down and work. It's the only place where I can be a little bit opulent or not opulent. I think the work's measured. I don't think of it as that might be able to help some. Other questions? I love being at your school. This is, as Paula mentioned, this is Randy. Also, this is the second time here. It feels like a really a place that you can do practical work without. I was saying to Randy at lunch that when I was at SARC, I felt like the world sort of watched SARC, what we did, why we did it, what it would lead to, like we were in a fishbowl. And this feels like a place where you just hunker down, do really interesting work, care for each other, take care of each other, share and learn together. I like the feel of the town, campus feels, it feels. Now I've lived in, spent a ton of time, a couple of years in London probably. I've lived in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, New York City for 7 years. Something about this, it feels good. Faculty, people I've met, it feels good. It's good. So, cultural agents out there, change the world. I'm not gonna. I'm done. I'm done. It's your playing field. The world needs it. As I said, it's a very tangled place, and it takes insight, conceptual wherewithal, and people who are deeply interested in humanity and non-human things, and try to shift the nature of the world via spatial representational material traditions. It's the most interesting discipline by some, because it touches all of them, touches everything. It has touched everything. So it's really hard. I think it's really, really hard. It's hard to teach, but a decent teacher, yes. It's hard, but I'm up for it. I wouldn't, if it was easy, I'd do gardening. Anyway, thank you all very, very much. It's really, really a pleasure and honor to be here and, yeah, I would go with that. Okay, thank you again all. Good to see all of you. Thank you. Next to the Zoomers, if there anybody out there, without on the Zoom.
You have a really nice note from Peter Baldwin.
Peter Baldwin, my dear
Yeah.
friend Peter Baldwin. Pay attention to Peter Baldwin online on Instagram. At Georgia. Discovery that-
This is great.
Hi, thanks, Terry. That was really great.
You're very
I
welcome.
was wondering, I had 2 classes this morning, if there was maybe a recording of that graduate research methodology that I could maybe get access to. And watch on my own. That'd be awesome. Sounds super interesting. So is it gonna go up in these slides? Yeah, we'll figure out the spot. We'll broadcast to help you guys. Great, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thanks.